Jae-Min Kang was not a man who froze. Men froze when he entered a room. Rivals froze when his black cars turned down their streets. Police officers froze when his name surfaced in their reports, and then quietly filed those reports in drawers that were never opened again. He was 34 years old and had already built what most men spent entire lifetimes trying to reach. The Kang syndicate operated beneath Seoul like an underground river, invisible from the surface, but feeding everything above it. Import docks along the eastern harbor moved on his schedule. 3 of the city's most profitable gambling operations answered to his lieutenants. Political campaigns had been funded and destroyed by decisions he made over breakfast. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. Before we continue, if you love intense mafia romance stories filled with shocking reunions, powerful men brought to their knees, and emotional twists you never see coming, make sure you hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story, because trust me, this one is only getting started. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to know which city is tuning in for this drama. Now, let's go back to the moment that changed everything. When Jae-Min Kang wanted something done, it was done. When he wanted someone to disappear, they disappeared. But when he walked into a room, conversation stopped. Not from politeness, but from instinct. The same instinct that makes every creature on earth go still when something dangerous passes by. He was, by every measure, untouchable. And yet, 2 years ago, he came home to a silent apartment. Her closet was empty. Her toothbrush was gone. The small jade bracelet she wore every day, the one her mother gave her, the one she never removed even when she slept, was sitting on the nightstand like a period at the end of a sentence. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Jae-Min Kang was not a man who stood in doorways. He searched for her the way he handled every problem, completely, quietly, with resources most people couldn't dream of. 4 weeks, 32 calls, 8 men, nothing. Soo-jin had vanished as cleanly as if she had never existed at all. Then came the easier conclusion. She had left him. She had chosen to go. She had known what he was, weighed against what she wanted, and made her decision without the courtesy of a conversation. He told himself it was a betrayal. He told himself that made it simple. He told himself he was over it. That last part he almost believed. And tonight, he was about to see her again. But not the way he had imagined it. The restaurant was called Lumiere, soft lighting designed to make everyone look beautiful. White tablecloth that cost more to launder per evening than most families spent on groceries per month. A piano player in the corner performing pieces that nobody listened to and everybody appreciated. It was the kind of place where politicians pretended to be honest, where businessmen pretended to be clean, and where old money pretended it had never done anything uncomfortable to become old. Jae-Min arrived at 8 o'clock, not because he was punctual, but because 8 o'clock was when he had decided to arrive, and the world arranged itself accordingly. He wore a tailored black shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, the edge of his tattoos just visible against his wrist, an aesthetic that split the room between fascination and fear. He wore no tie. Men who needed ties to be taken seriously weren't taken seriously enough. Beside him walked Arya Moretti. She was the kind of beautiful that required maintenance, structured, deliberate, yet architectural. Her dress was midnight blue, cut to display exactly the right amount of everything, and she wore it with the confidence of someone who had spent years learning how to be looked at. She was Italian by birth, Seoul by choice, and she had been at Jae-Min's side for 7 months. She was intelligent, she was sophisticated, she asked very few questions about his work. That last quality had earned her 7 months. The hostess greeted them with a bow that bent slightly deeper than it did for other guests. "Mr. Kang, your table is ready." Of course it was. They were seated near the center of the room, a choice that was not accidental. Jae-Min did not sit in corners. He sat where rooms could orient around him. Arya scanned the other diners with practiced pleasant neutrality. "Senator Cho is here tonight," she said quietly. I know. He keeps looking at you." "He should." She smiled slightly and picked up the menu. Jae-Min didn't bother with his. He already knew what he was ordering. He always knew. What he was thinking about, not that he would have admitted it to anyone, was the number 2. 2 years since the apartment, 2 years since the jade bracelet on the nightstand. 2 years since he had looked at a woman's face and briefly, involuntarily compared it to hers. Now he pushed the thought back into the drawer where it belonged. "Good evening." The voice came from beside the table, quiet, measured, professional. A waitress in a white service jacket and black apron, hair pulled into a neat bun, standing with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to make herself invisible on purpose. She was reaching past to refill the water glass at the next table. Jae-Min didn't look up. He was thinking. Then something shifted. Not a word. Not a movement. It's something molecular, the way the air in a room changes when a window opens somewhere distant. He didn't understand why his eyes moved toward her. They just did. The light caught her profile, and Jae-Min Kang froze. His hand, which had been lifting his glass, stopped midway. The sound of the restaurant, the piano, the conversation, the careful clink of silverware, dropped away as if someone had turned a dial. He knew that jaw. That particular angle of a nose that had once pressed against his shoulder while she slept. The way she held herself, slightly forward, slightly careful, the way she always had. He knew her. She shifted to set the water pitcher down, and he saw her stomach, round, unmistakable, the kind of pregnant that didn't leave room for uncertainty or reinterpretation. 8 months, maybe more, straining gently against the service uniform that was a size too large in every other place. Soo-jin, his wife. The woman who had walked out of his life 2 years ago, standing 3 feet from his dinner table in a waitress uniform. Pregnant. The cloth paused in her hand, because she felt the stare. She always could feel it, the specific weight of his attention, the way it was different from other people's attention. She had told him that once, laughing, early in their marriage. You look at things like you're deciding whether to own them. She turned. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. Yet the world narrowed to a single breath. Jae-Min, Arya's voice cut through from across the table. Light, curious, with the particular sharpness of a woman who noticed everything. You've gone somewhere. He couldn't answer. Soo-jin broke the eye contact first. The professional mask came down like a window shade, clean, immediate, practiced. Good evening, she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. Can I take your order? The same voice, the same low register, the same careful pronunciation. The voice he had heard in his sleep for months after she left before he had trained himself to stop hearing it. Now it was calling him nothing, with her eyes fixed at the level of the table. Arya looked between them. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. Do you two know each other? Jae-Min stood. The chair scraped back. At the next table, a conversation stopped. Nearby, Senator Cho looked over. Soo-jin's fingers tightened slightly on her notepad. Where have you been? He said. Yeah, his voice came out low, stripped of everything except the question. Working, she replied. For 2 years. Jae-Min. Her eyes finally came up to meet his, and there was nothing soft in them, just the flat, careful gaze of someone who had made a decision and was standing inside it. Please sit down. I'll send another server. You won't. Arya set down her menu very slowly. Jae-Min. People are watching. He knew. He didn't care. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't care who was watching. You disappeared, he said, quieter now, more dangerous. You left without a word. And now you're... His eyes moved to her stomach. The question he couldn't ask in front of a restaurant full of people burned in his chest like a coal. I'm working, Soo-jin repeated. Sir. That word. That single syllable, said in his wife's voice, calling him nothing. The restaurant manager materialized at the edge of the table. Mr. Kang, is everything all right? Arya stood. She didn't slam her clutch down or raise her voice. She was far too composed for that, which somehow made it worse. She picked up her things with the deliberate precision of someone deciding exactly how much dignity to preserve on the way out the door. I'll let you handle this, she said. Her tone was flawless. Only her eyes carried the heat. Don't call me tonight. Her heels struck the marble in clean, even intervals as she walked across the dining room. Every person in her path looked away. The door opened, closed. She was gone. Jae-Min didn't watch her leave, because Soo-jin had already turned and was walking toward the back hallway. Spine straight, head level, one hand moving instinctively to rest against the side of her stomach as she moved. He followed her before the thought had finished forming. The alley behind Lumiere smelled of rain and old bricks. A single light above the service door threw pale yellow across the wet concrete. Soo-jin stopped near the wall, at one hand still resting on the curve of her stomach, and turned to face him. She didn't look afraid. She never had been afraid of him. That had been one of the first things he noticed about her, back when noticing things about her had still been new. "You have no right," she said quietly. "No right to what?" "To look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I owe you something." The alley was cold. Somewhere above them, a siren moved through the city and faded. Jae-min stood in his expensive clothes in a puddle he hadn't noticed, looking at the woman he had trained himself to stop thinking about, and felt something unlock in his chest that he wasn't ready for. "The baby," he said. She didn't answer immediately. "Soo-jin." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes, when they finally met his, were exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the shift she'd just worked. "Yes," she said quietly. One word, the air left his body. Somewhere in that single syllable was 2 years of distance, 2 years of an empty apartment and a jade bracelet left on a nightstand, and a man who had told himself it was simple. Nothing about this was simple. Nothing about this had ever been simple. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I found out the week I left." The word hung between them in the cold air. "The week I left." Jae-min didn't speak. He had built an empire on knowing when to press and when to wait. Right now his chest was doing something unfamiliar, something that had no name in his vocabulary, and he needed a second before he trusted his voice. "They came to me at work," Soo-jin said finally. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the wet ground, the way she did when she was deciding how much to give. 3 men. They knew my schedule, my route home, what I ordered for lunch." A pause. "They knew I was pregnant before I'd told anyone." The cold settled deeper. Which syndicate?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." She looked up at him then. "The Lim family." Something moved behind his eyes, fast and dark, like a blade being drawn. The Lim family. His oldest rivals, men he had outmaneuvered twice in the last year alone, which meant they had been looking for a different kind of leverage. They had found her. "They said if I stayed with you, I wouldn't live to see my 3rd trimester." Her voice was even. She had rehearsed this, or she had lived with it long enough that the edges had worn smooth. "They said you were untouchable, but I wasn't. You should have told me." "I tried." The evenness cracked, just slightly, just at the edge. "But you were always surrounded, always in a meeting, a deal, a room full of men with guns, and every time I looked at you in those rooms, I understood something." She placed a hand on her stomach. "I was the door they would walk through to get to you. Yeah, when I was carrying your child behind that door." Jae-min said nothing. Because she was right. He had told himself, told her, told everyone, that his world was controlled, contained, that the violence lived on one side of a line and the people he loved lived safely on the other. He had believed it, genuinely believed it, the way powerful men believe the things that allow them to sleep. He had been wrong, and she had paid for it. "I can give you money," he said. "Whatever you need." "A building? Security? Doctors?" "No." "Soo-jin, I don't take money from syndicates." She said it without heat, just fact. "Not even yours." He pulled out his wallet anyway, old reflex. She looked at it the way she might look at a hammer someone had offered her to fix a wound, and he put it away. The guilt was new. He didn't know what to do with it. It sat in his ribcage like something with weight. Then she went still. Her hand pressed harder against her stomach. Her eyes closed for 2 seconds, 3, and when they opened, there was a tightness around them that hadn't been there before. "How long has that been happening?" he asked. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." She didn't answer. He crossed the distance between them before she could argue and placed a steadying hand at her back, careful, uncertain, nothing like the man he was inside the restaurant. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her frame. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, quietly, the resistance went out of her shoulders. "One night," she said, "somewhere that isn't yours." He nodded. "One night." The penthouse was registered to a name that didn't exist. 43rd floor. Clean lines, minimal furniture, the kind of silence that cost money to maintain. Jae-Min kept 3 properties like this across the city. No syndicate paperwork, no names his enemies would recognize, no trail. He had built them for contingencies. He had not imagined this contingency. Soo-jin stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at Seoul spread below like a circuit board lit from within. She hadn't spoken much in the car, neither had he. There was too much between them to fill with words, so they had let the city pass in silence. "The bedroom is through there," he said. "I'll have someone bring food. I don't need much." "I know, I'll have someone bring food," she almost smiled. Almost. The doctor arrived 40 minutes later, a small, precise woman who asked no questions about the circumstances and answered only to a number Jae-Min had memorized years ago for exactly this kind of arrangement. She carried her bag in quietly, spoke to Soo-jin in the bedroom with the door half closed, and emerged 20 minutes later with the expression of someone delivering careful news. "She's exhausted and slightly dehydrated. The contractions are early and irregular. Braxton Hicks, most likely. But she needs rest, real rest." A pause. "And less stress?" Jae-Min nodded. The doctor looked at him for a moment. "Would you like to come in?" She said, "It's your choice." He hadn't expected that. The permission caught him somewhere unguarded. He went in. Soo-jin was propped against the headboard, her hands resting on her stomach, watching him cross the room with the same careful neutrality she'd worn all evening. The doctor set a small device on the nightstand, adjusted a sensor, and the room filled with a sound Jae-Min had never heard before. Rapid, steady, insistent, a heartbeat, small and fast and absolutely certain of itself. He stood very still. Nobody spoke. The sound continued, tum-tum, 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 filling the quiet room with something so alive it made the rest of the world feel thin by comparison. Jae-Min sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. He didn't trust his face. He looked at the floor. Looked at his own hands. Hands that had signed orders and broken agreements and built an empire from methods he had never once questioned, and he felt something move through him that he had no armor against. When he looked up, Soo-jin was watching him. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something quieter and more complicated than either. "He moves a lot at night," she said softly. "He." Jae-Min exhaled slowly. "You know it's a boy." "I suspected. The doctor confirmed it last month." "A son." He pressed his thumb and forefinger against his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. When he lowered his hand, she was still watching. "Will you choose power?" she said quietly. "Or us?" He didn't answer immediately. The honest answer required more than a second, and she deserved more than reflex. But before he could speak, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. One of his lieutenants, a message that was 3 words long, which was always worse than 10. They saw her, his jaw set. Out across the city, something had already begun moving. The slow, mechanical turning of an enemy who had been waiting for exactly this moment. He looked at Soo-jin. She read his face and closed her eyes. The council met in a basement that appeared on no city map. 7 men around a concrete table, old money and new violence in equal measure. They had been running Seoul's underground between them for a combined 40 years, and they were not accustomed to waiting. Jae-Min was 12 minutes late. Well, he had never been late before. He took his seat at the head of the table without apology. The room recalibrated around him, the way it always did, but slower this time. He noticed the noticing. "The limb shipment route," he said. "Talk." His lieutenant, Park, ran through the details. Routes, timing, exposure points. Jae-Min listened with half his mind and kept the other half somewhere on the 43rd floor of a building registered to a name that didn't exist. It was Choi who said it. But of course it was Choi, barrel-chested, old school, the kind of man who mistook bluntness for courage. "You seem elsewhere, Kang." The room went careful. "I'm here," Jae-Min said. "The Lim family thinks differently." Choi leaned back. "Word moves fast. They're saying you've gone soft, that there's a reason for it." A pause weighted with implication. Personal reasons. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded decisions. Jae-Min looked at him with the flat, impatient expression that had ended careers. "Are you asking me a question, Choi?" Choi said nothing more. His phone moved against the table 40 minutes later. A single alert from the detail he'd placed on Soo-jin. Invisible, 3 men, rotating shifts. She hadn't known about them. He had anticipated that conversation and postponed it. The alert read, "Contact, east side of Yonsei Clinic, 2 limb men on foot." Then 11 seconds later, situation resolved. He excused himself from the table without explanation. She was standing in the clinic entrance when he arrived, arms crossed, the particular stillness of someone suppressing fury for the sake of a public setting. The 2 limb men were somewhere they would not be found for several hours. His detail had been efficient. He got out of the car. "You had people following me," she said. "Watching. There's a difference." "There isn't." Her voice was controlled, but her eyes weren't. "Oh, I saw what your men did, Jae-Min, I saw. They were limbs. I know who they were. I'm talking about what your men did to them." She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. "This is the world you want to bring a child into. This is the protection you're offering." "Yes," he said plainly. "Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is leaving your world. You tried that. They still found you." That landed. He hadn't meant it as a weapon, but it landed like one. And he watched her absorb it. She didn't collapse under it. She never did. "Then what is the answer?" she asked quietly. He didn't respond immediately, because the answer forming in his chest was one he hadn't fully examined yet. It had been building since the alley, since the heartbeat in the quiet room, since he. He returned to the council an hour later. 7 men, same table, same concrete room. He stood at the head of it and looked at each of them in turn. I have something to say." The room stilled. "My family comes first." Nobody spoke. The words moved through the room like a tremor through bedrock, slow, structural, the kind that changes the shape of things permanently. Choi stared at him. Park looked at the table. Outside, Seoul kept moving. But in the underground that ran beneath it, something had shifted on its axis, and everyone in that room understood that nothing would be the same. He found out about Park on a Tuesday. Not through surveillance or interrogation, through a receipt. A restaurant tab paid in cash at a place the Lim family used for quiet meetings. Park's name wasn't on it, but his habit was, he always ordered the same thing wherever he went. Jae-Min had noticed it years ago and filed it away as nothing. Nothing had become something. He said nothing to Park. He reassigned the detail on Soo-jin, replaced every man Park had recommended, and waited. 2 days. If the leak was confirmed, now he would know by the silence that followed the change. The silence lasted 18 hours. The call came at 3 a.m. Not an alert. A voice, one of the new detail, breathing wrong. "Penthouse, now! We held them at the garage, but there's another team inside the..." The line cut. Jae-Min was already moving. He took the service stairs, 43 floors. He didn't feel them. And he came through the stairwell door on the top floor and registered 3 things simultaneously. 2 of his men down in the corridor, a door to the penthouse standing open, and a sound from inside that stopped his blood. Soo-jin's voice, low, controlled, furious. He went through the door. 1 man had her by the arm near the window, a second covering the room. Neither of them heard him come in. The first one didn't hear anything after that. The second turned in time to see Jae-Min's face and made the mistake of hesitating. It was over in under a minute. The silence afterward was enormous. Jae-Min stood in the center of the room, his shirt, his hands, the pale, expensive floor. He looked down at what the last 4 minutes had made of him and felt something he had never allowed himself to feel after violence, revulsion, not at the act, at the ease of it. Soo-jin hadn't moved from the window. She was pressed against it. Had one hand on her stomach, her eyes tracking him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. And he had seen her look at him many ways over 3 years. This was different. This was the look of someone finally, completely understanding the thing they had married. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "The baby, we're fine." Her voice was flat, controlled the way his was controlled, not calm, but contained because the alternative was worse. "Jae-Min." He looked at her. "Oh, if you stay this man," she said quietly, "we can't survive. Not me, not him. We cannot survive what you are." He didn't argue. He looked down at his hands again. There was a version of himself that would have explained it. justified it, told her this was protection, that the world required this, that men like the ones on his floor had made their own choices. He had used every one of those arguments before. He was tired of them. He called the council at dawn. Not the basement room. His voice. We shall on a call, one by one. 7 men, 7 conversations, all brief. The violent operations were done. The enforcement arm, the contracts, the arrangements with men who solved problems the way the ones on his floor had tried to solve Soo-jin. Done. He would restructure. Legitimate holdings. It would take time, cost money, make enemies of people who were already enemies. He didn't care. By noon, 3 council members had made calls to the Lim family. By evening, Jae-Min Kang had more enemies than he'd ever had in his life. He sat across from Soo-jin in the pale quiet of the penthouse, his hands clean now, and found that was the first thing in a long time that felt like the right kind of cost. It took 11 days to dismantle what had taken 8 years to build. Not the legitimate holdings, those he kept, the shipping infrastructure, the tech subsidiaries. Yep, 2 construction firms that had spent years slowly becoming real businesses beneath their original purpose. Those he could defend in daylight. Everything else he sold, closed, or walked away from, absorbing the losses without flinching because flinching was a luxury for men who weren't sure of their decision. He was sure. His lawyers worked in shifts. His accountants flagged 17 exposure points, and he resolved each one. By the end of the second week, the Kang Syndicate, in the form it had existed for 8 years, was functionally gone. What remained was a holding company, 4 legal operations, and a target. The Lim family's response came not as a message, but as an action. A shipping container at the eastern dock, one of his legitimate ones, burned to the waterline at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. A calling card left in the wreckage. Old Mafia language, the kind that didn't require translation. Open war. His remaining security team tripled the protocols. The safe house, a different property, a different alias, a residential building in a quiet district that looked like exactly what it was meant to look like, was locked down within the hour. Soo-jin received the news the way she received most things now, without panic, with the careful steadiness of someone who had already survived the worst of their own fear. How bad? She asked. Manageable? She looked at him. How bad? Bad enough that I need you here, and calm and trusting me to handle it. A long pause. Then, separate bedrooms. Yes. And you don't make decisions about my life without telling me first. Yes. She nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, and they both knew it. It was something more provisional and more honest than forgiveness. A door opened a crack, enough to let air through. The safe house had a small second bedroom she'd arranged herself, housed with things she'd bought with her own money. He didn't comment on that. He understood it. They moved around each other carefully in the shared spaces. Kitchen, living room, the narrow hallway between their doors. Occasionally they talked. About small things first. Food, sleep, the doctor's last report. Then, gradually, with the tentativeness of people handling something fragile, about larger ones. 3 years of marriage, what had been real inside it. What had been neglect dressed up as ambition. He listened more than he spoke. That was new. On the 9th night he was sitting on the floor outside her bedroom door. She'd left it half open, reading through a contract on his phone while she slept. Or he thought she was sleeping. He spoke quietly, more to himself than anyone. Something about the shipping restructure, thinking aloud. Then he stopped and said, lower. You're going to have a different life than I did. That's not a hope. That's a decision. From inside the room, movement. A small, distinct pressure against the wall of her stomach, visible even from the doorway. He saw it. He pressed his hand gently to the doorframe, the closest he could get. I know, he said quietly. I'm going to be worth meeting. Soo-jin's eyes were open. She said nothing, but she didn't look away. At 4 a.m., she appeared in his doorway, one hand braced against the frame. As her face arranged in the controlled expression he now recognized as her version of alarm. It's too early, she said. He was already standing. How far apart? 6 minutes. He had the car ready in 4. They were 4 blocks from the hospital when the first car appeared. Black, no plates, moving parallel on the cross street with the particular patience of something that had been waiting. Jae-min registered at the same moment his driver did, a shared glance in the rearview mirror. No words needed. A second car materialized behind them. "Don't stop," Jae-Min said. Soo-jin's hand found the door handle, not to open it, just to hold something. Her breathing was measured and deliberate, the kind that takes practice. Contractions 4 minutes apart now. His phone was already at his ear. 3 calls in 90 seconds. His security lead, his lawyer, one number he had told himself he was done calling. Not for violence, for information, for routing. Here's for the kind of city knowledge that didn't require anyone to get hurt. "East tunnel entrance," the third voice said. "They won't have it covered. Too visible. Send someone to hold it. Already moving." He ended the call. Soo-jin was watching him with wide, exhausted eyes. "No guns," he said, as much to himself as to her. "We don't stop and we don't engage. We just drive." The driver drove. The black cars followed to the mouth of the tunnel and stopped there, a calculated halt. Our men who understood that a gunfight at a hospital entrance was exposure, none of them could afford either. Jae-Min had counted on that. Violence had its own economics. He understood them better than anyone. They reached the hospital entrance at 4:31 a.m. The delivery room was very white and very loud and completely indifferent to everything happening outside it. Soo-jin was transferred, assessed, moved with the brisk efficiency of people who treated urgency as routine. Here Jae-Min followed until someone told him to change into scrubs, and he did so without argument, which would have surprised everyone who knew him and no one in this room. He sat beside her. She was gripping the bed rail and looking at the ceiling with an expression that had moved past pain into something more fundamental. "I'm scared," she said. Not to him specifically, just into the air of the room. "I know. I mean..." She stopped as the contraction crested and broke. When she could speak again, her voice was quieter. "What if something goes wrong? What if I..." "Don't." "Jae-Min..." "Nothing is going wrong." He took her hand. She didn't pull it away. "I can't lose you again." The words came out without architecture, without control, the way true things do when there's no time left to manage them. "I can't, so nothing is going wrong." She looked at him. He looked back. Something passed between them that had no name in either of their languages. She squeezed his hand and turned back to the work of it. His son was born at 6:17 a.m., small, furious, and immediate, announcing himself to the room with the total conviction of someone who had already decided the world owed him attention. Jae-Min held him with the careful terror of a man handling the most valuable and fragile thing he had ever been trusted with. Soo-jin, pale and exhausted and more beautiful than the room deserved, watched his face. "Soo-jun," she said quietly. "Light. A new beginning." He nodded. His throat wouldn't cooperate with anything more complicated. The message came an hour later. His security lead, one line, "Lim in custody, your call." Jae-Min looked at his son's face. At Soo-jin sleeping, he typed back 4 words, "Hand him to the police, not execution, not disappearance." A door closed legally, permanently, in the language of the new world he had just promised a 6-pound person he intended to build. His enemies would call it weakness. Yet he was beginning to understand that it wasn't. The story broke on a Thursday. Not the version he would have written. No version in a newspaper ever was, but close enough to the truth that he didn't bother disputing it. Kang Jae-Min, former head of the Kang Syndicate, implicated in decade-long criminal enterprise. Key rival delivered to authorities. Source? Anonymous. Beneath it, a photograph taken outside the hospital. Him in yesterday's clothes, still wearing the look of a man who had held his son for the first time 2 hours earlier. He read it once and set his phone face down on the table. His lawyer called at 7, then his accountant, then a number he didn't recognize, which turned out to be a prosecutor's office making preliminary contact with the careful politeness of people who weren't yet sure how hard to push. He answered all of them. He was cooperative in the precise, bounded way his lawyers advised. And then he went back into the hospital room and sat in the chair beside Soo-jin's bed and watched Soo-jun sleep in the plastic bassinet between them, his small chest rising and falling with the absolute confidence of someone who had no idea what a newspaper was. The investigation was real. He had prepared for it, had spent the 11 days of dismantling the syndicate creating a paper record that was, if not entirely clean, at least navigable. There were things he would answer for. Yet he had known that when he made the decision, consequence was not the same as punishment, and he was old enough now to understand the difference. He told his lawyers to cooperate within the law and stop trying to make the law disappear. They found this instruction difficult to process. He didn't repeat it. Soo-jin came home, to the safe house, Mao, which had softened over weeks into something closer to a real home, on a gray Tuesday with Seo-jun in a car seat and dark circles under her eyes, and a particular expression he had learned to read as thinking hard about something she hadn't decided to say yet. She said it 3 days later, in the kitchen, over coffee, while Seo-jun slept. "Will you regret it?" She wasn't looking at him. Her thumb moved around the rim of her cup. "The syndicate, the power, everything you built." She looked up. Will you regret giving it up?" He considered the question seriously, the way she deserved. "Parts of it," he said. "I'd be lying if I said otherwise." She nodded slowly. "But regret requires believing you chose wrong." He set his cup down. "I didn't choose wrong. I just chose late." The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere in the back room, Seo-jun made a small sound and settled again. "I was so angry," she said. Not past tense exactly, more like naming a thing she was in the process of setting down. For 2 years I was so angry at you and at the world you built, and at myself for loving someone in the middle of it. I know. You don't get to fix it with one decision. I know that too." She looked at him for a long time. The particular look of someone taking an honest inventory. "We try again," she said finally. "Slowly. No promises about what it becomes." "Agreed." "Separate bedrooms for now." The corner of his mouth moved. "Agreed." She picked up her cup. He picked up his. Outside, Anna's soul went about its business, loud, indifferent, rearranging itself around the spaces left by things that had ended and the small, unannounced beginnings of things that hadn't yet found their names. Inside, something that had been broken for 2 years took one quiet step toward becoming whole. Seo-jun had opinions about breakfast, loud, immediate, non-negotiable opinions, delivered at a volume that suggested he had inherited something from his father's side. Jae-min had learned to interpret the variations, the hungry cry, the tired cry, the cry that meant nothing except, "I am here and I require acknowledgement," with the same focused attention he had once applied to reading rooms full of dangerous men. He found this, privately, more challenging, and considerably more worthwhile. The apartment was modest by any standard he had previously accepted. 3 rooms, a kitchen with a window that faced east, and a small balcony where Soo-jin had placed 2 chairs and a plant she tended with quiet determination. The legal restructuring had preserved enough to live well. He had chosen to live simply instead, partly for security, mostly because simplicity was new and he was curious about it. His name still appeared in newspapers occasionally. The investigation had produced 2 formal charges, both resolved through cooperation and the kind of restitution that didn't require prison, but did require sustained public accountability. He paid it without performance. It was the least interesting part of his current life. Choi called on a Wednesday, not Choi himself, an intermediary, which meant Choi had learned something from the last year. The offer was framed carefully. A restructured alliance, legitimate on the surface, the old architecture rebuilt with cleaner walls. On power without the visible violence. A seat at a table that the city's new money was quietly assembling. Jae-min listened to the full pitch. He had learned finally that patience in listening cost nothing. Then he said, no. The intermediary waited for conditions, for negotiation, for the counteroffer that men like Jae-Min Kang were supposed to produce. That's the whole answer, Jae-min said. Tell him I'm unavailable. Permanently. He ended the call and went back to the kitchen where Seo-jun was reconsidering his position on pureed sweet potato. The reservation at Lumiere was Soo-jin's idea. He had assumed she would never want to go back. She corrected this assumption with the particular patience she now used to correct most of his assumptions. Gently, directly, without apology. I want to go back, she said, as myself. They went on a Friday. He wore a dark jacket with no visible tattoos, and she wore a green dress that Seo-jun had immediately tried to eat one corner of before the babysitter arrived. She looked. There was no word that didn't fall short, so he stopped looking for one and simply looked at her. The hostess showed them to a table near the window. Not the center of the room. Jae-Min had requested the window specifically. He no longer needed to sit where rooms could orient around him. The piano played something unhurried. The tablecloths were still white. The room was exactly as it had been 8 months ago, because rooms like this were designed to be permanent, to suggest that nothing as disruptive as real life could touch them. And yet, he looked across the table at Soo-jin, who was reading the menu with a small smile at something she'd found in the descriptions, and thought about the last time he had sat in this room. The frozen moment, the white service jacket, the world narrowing to a single breath. And he had once ruled a city with fear. Men had rearranged their lives around his name. Rivals had disappeared. Police had filed him quietly away. Now he ruled a small apartment with laughter, with breakfast opinions and a plant on the balcony and 2 chairs facing east. Soo-jin looked up from the menu and found him watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Everything." For the first time in his life, he no longer needed men to freeze, because love had done what violence never could. How did it make him still? If this story moved you, if you felt Jae-Min's transformation, Soo-jin's strength, and that powerful moment when love became stronger than fear, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who believes in second chances. And if you want more Mafia romance stories filled with betrayal, redemption, and unforgettable twists, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more intense than this one. Oh, tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven him, or would you have walked away forever? I'll see you in the next story.